the Mindful Before Meaning channel. Your host, Mike Rowan. We're joined today by Ken Lowry, who, uh, I don't know, want to do a little introduction for yourself?
Sure. Um, I'd say where I am now is I am something like I try to use analogy frequently. And so the way I analogize what my position is in the world is something like a mountain climber.
Okay.
I try to participate in my life in order to find conformity to reality as closely as I can. So affording that kind of rationalism and the deeply reciprocally opening um, connectedness to reality. And then I do that through, I try to make everything in my life some kind of practice of affording and furthering that. So um, the way I got there is kind of by means of, I grew up in fundamental kind of Christianity, and then moved through evangelical Christianity. And then, I use the lens of traditional Christianity quite a lot now,
Mhm.
um, as a lens of propositional and ontological speech. But I try not to get too tied into any of those things. Vervaeke has been one of the central figures in helping me to orient myself to the mountain, I would say. So yeah, there's a brief of
Cool.
who I am and where I am.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you for that. I didn't want to kind of mischaracterize you, so I thought I'd let you put in your own words. That is how you came to my attention. I saw the video that you did with John Vervecke, and um, I enjoyed that a lot. And I started watching videos on your channel, which is Climbing Mount Sophie, correct?
Climbing on Mount Sophia, yeah.
Most Mount Sophia, right? Sorry. Um, and I kind of just had some ambition to reach out to you and like have this conversation. So we haven't gotten to know each other very well, but we're sort of sharing this right from the onset. And I hope that we can have a good conversation that kind of echoes in hopefully a more accessible way, because I am coming into this with a lower level of sophistication than a lot of the other discourses that I've watched. It's kind of like some of it goes over my head. So maybe this would be a good video for introduction to other people, and I can ask some clarifying questions and stuff as we go. So I felt like, us having this discussion would be a more accessible way for me to participate. It's just I have this desire to participate in what's going on, and what John is kind of like set out to do has been inspiring to me. So I feel like in some small way that I can reflect that and participate in that and share it with other people as well. So that's
Yeah, that's always there's always such a challenge around language, right? Like um and you have to use specific words to try to model something really precisely. But then the difficulty is always that, especially for a lot of us that are still caught in a lot of ego spaces, there's the trigger reaction of just like, oh, I don't know what that means, and I'm not smart enough for this or something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm constantly like, I kind of dove off the deep end into a lot of this stuff. So, um, like I've characterized myself in some of the uh, videos that I've done on my channel. I'm something like a sprinter, right? I just try to run straight up the mountain, and
oh, cool.
sometimes I lose I lose the ability to communicate um, to even where I was 2 weeks ago,
Hmm.
just because I'm fully immersed in where I am. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited like when you reach out and had some of those, and just what I'm hearing from you there, trying to flesh out some things. I'll find that super helpful for me as well. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, that's good. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to do some mindfulness practice here and kind of zero ourselves out with that present moment awareness before we move into our discussion. So, if you wouldn't mind leading us in a little meditation, that would be great.
Sure. So um, my meditation practice has evolved over time, but I'll just kind of go through a sketch of what I do now, and we'll see how it goes. I'm not used to guiding meditations or anything like that, but I can kind of walk through what I do. So typically I'll kind of find a space in my body where, whether I'm sitting or lying down or sometimes even standing, where I try to imagine like a through line of a center point of the mass that is my body, and I try to find and center there. And while you're doing that, try to kind of breathe in through your nose and out through your nose if possible, and just be mindful of that. I like to bring my finger and thumb together to try to create maximal kind of feedback of body parts touching. And I almost always close my eyes for these. And then usually I'll have music playing, but the first place that I start is to work with my body and my limbs. So my arms, my legs, the mechanisms through which I connect physically to reality and move reality around. And try to recognize and feel the ways in which I inhabit those, but also am distinct from them. So maybe just take 2 or 3 breaths at that point. And then moving to the realm of feelings. So I try to feel my body, feel the sensations of everything that is available to me. And again, try to notice them for what they are, especially kind of the feeling of the vibrational kind of pulsing of your heartbeat, and just that feeling of kind of dynamic, almost like static, that exists in your muscles. And just sit with that. And all the time kind of keeping in mind's eye that kind of through line of how it feels to be collected around a center point. And then from there, I like to move into the space of thought. And for me, the image that works quite well generally is to picture my mind as a lake or an ocean. And as thoughts come in, to image them as waves and watch them come in and watch them go. And in so doing, witness and feel the ways in which my thoughts appear to me, but in some real sense, I am distinct from them. then from this space, there is, for me, an opening into an exploratory realm in which all kinds of things will emerge. This is generally the space where things like mystical experiences have happened for me, or just the space of peace and just awareness in its naked form. But whenever we're ready, we can move your fingers and toes and feet, and then just come back to the room. So that's kind of the primary aspects of what for me now is generally my meditation practice.
Okay, great. Thank you. I enjoyed that a lot.
Oh, I believe you're muted. Sorry.
Oh. Yeah, I forgot I muted myself. Yeah, thank you for that. That was very good, and I want to look into that music that you use. What was the name of that YouTube channel?
I believe it's Anthony Sommer, Sommer. I think that's right. Yeah, so early on for me, I started doing, guided imagery meditations, and then kind of moved into less imagery and more just guided breath work and things like that. And then now I'm happy to engage with someone leading a meditation, but oftentimes I just do it with music, or sometimes with silence, either way.
Okay, yeah. I've mixed it up. I've really enjoyed doing just burning a candle, just sitting and getting like a candle that has like a 15-minute burn time and just letting it burn out, and kind of having like a point of visual focus. Are you familiar at all with the Shambhala meditation or Shambhala centers?
I certainly know the name. I don't know that I don't know that I'd be familiar procedurally at all.
Yeah, so it's sort of how it was explained to me is that it's the meditation practice taken out of the Buddhist tradition, and there are these Shambhala meditation centers all over the place. Sort of, if I wanted to put like an agenda or like, to it, kind of to have somewhere like an entry level Buddhist experience for people that's accessible to them. But there's not really like an agenda per se.
So people have a hang up with Buddhism per se that's like a intermediary where they don't feel like they have to commit to some propositional thing.
Yeah, and also kind of secularized to let's just start with the meditation. And so I have gone to a Shambhala meditation center, and I did their like Shambhala level 1, which is like a weekend meditation, and they do like an eyes open. It's sort of like a more awareness of stimuli, kind of like a awakened meditation. So that's where I get that, maintaining a visual stimuli just as they suggested, but I do find myself wanting to close my eyes, and also like to be present with some kind of stimuli, whether it's a sensation or a sound. I think that a lot of times in certain mind frames that I have, music helps me to kind of transition to have that stimuli. So I'll definitely be incorporating that recommendation into some meditation practices. But I am going to do something here. I'm going to pull up Akira and John Vervecchi's song that Akira did to kind of transition between our mindfulness and our discussion. I hope that this works. I'm not the I'm not the best at this OBS thing. So bear with me if you're watching. Let's see, is this it? Here we go. And hopefully, Ken, this will come through for you too.
Akira. It's for the heroes.
Because, I mean, I'm talking with the person who gave us the AMA, gave me Blue Church, Jordan Hall. And part of that is this idea, which is the religion that's not a religion, and trying to come up with a post-religious faith. Because here's the idea. This is probably, in some ways, my most radical idea. I want to do what, like, Augustine did as the Roman Empire is falling. He laid the foundation. He laid the cultural cognitive grammar for an entirely different culture. And then he stole the culture bottom up. He laid the cultural cognitive grammar for an entirely different culture. And then he stole the culture bottom up. I want to help steal the culture. Away. Steal it away. Steal it away. I want to help steal the culture. Away. Steal it away. Steal it away. And do everything I can. The imperial system at some point clamped down again, but nevertheless we shifted out of antiquity. We shifted to a different world. So I want to try and do that. I want to try and create the systems of meaning, the religion that's not a religion, the ecologies of practices, the communities, the networks of communities. All of this is already happening. Really empower it, both in terms of its grammar, give it the best scientific tools for engineering the practices and the ecology of practices. I basically want to steal the culture. to not play their game and to shift over to a totally different game, to shift the culture. It's to steal the culture. The only thing I can get from history that's been able to do that are religions. But for reasons that I've articulated, I don't want, it's not personally, I mean in terms of the functionality, I don't think the standard model, the axial age model of religion is going to do what we need in order to steal the culture as deeply as we need to steal it.
Okay. So, thanks for indulging me in sharing that listening experience.
That's a great one. I think that's a super helpful thing. Maybe not to start with Vervaeke, but once you've interacted with his work a little bit, then to listen to that, I think is really helpful to tie a lot of things together.
Yeah, a lot of times I find that very empowering and obviously like stimulating, and I try to transition out of my meditation. So I have this thing where I kind of juxtapose, and this will be a good segue into some topics for us here, where I try to say there's a time set aside for my mindfulness practice and having present moment awareness, and it's kind of a more complacent, in a sense, being like mode, right? And then but I don't want to use that to kind of like dampen and slow me down, broadly speaking, in my life. I want to be aggressive in like doing good works out in the world. You know what I mean? Like tackle my problems, be there for the people I love, make impact. I really appreciated the extent that you went into a conversation in a recent video of yours with your career and your profession, and being there for people in the moment, in the last moments of their life, and to work in the medical profession, and leave space for them to experience whatever that transition is, whatever that experience is, those types of things, right? So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is sort of to challenge you, like, what is the point of all of this, right? We can go deep into the intellectual nuances of these theological questions and philosophical questions. Are we just kind of articulating a structure in which to kind of compel ourselves to do good works in the world, or is this really necessary for like spiritual fulfillment in like in a more spiritual sense, in a saving our souls or something?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I am really conscious of and concerned about in my own work, I guess, that's developing, is that sometimes the feedback that I get, like I mentioned earlier, I think before we started recording, is that I oftentimes use language and speak in a manner that is not terribly accessible to people. And I think then it oftentimes comes across as being kind of an academic pursuit or something where we're trying to map territory that doesn't necessarily, it's nice for explaining maybe, some kind of theory of everything, but it doesn't necessarily bleed back onto your day-to-day life. And I think, that I think is deeply dangerous, and a deep issue that we face in a lot of areas today, and something that I want to actually, the reason that I've gone down the route that I have is to push back on, because what I want is actually an explanation that enables flourishing, in my life, enables flourishing in the relationships that I have with others around me. And so for me, that's always the litmus test. Like, the test is always, okay, this is great. You might have great insight. You might have tremendous knowledge or whatever, but what does your life look like? And not just, your life in terms of what do you look like at work, or how do you engage, are you running a soup kitchen, that's great. But if you go home and you're angry at your wife and you've been divorced 4 times and you can't keep relationship with your children, like holistic flourishing. So for me, that's kind of the goal of it all, is to, okay, how do we become fully human? How do we fall in love with being again, to borrow a term from John Vervaeke? So yeah, I mean, that's the core of it for me.
Okay. Yeah, and is this whole thing like an exercise in equipping yourself with a way to like have the meaning, the kind of like the whole premise of the lecture series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, to combat that and to kind of like stay focused and wired into what is meaningful and allow that to flourish inside you and participate in a culture of that?
Yeah, in terms of the interactional space, I'd definitely say that. In terms of like my impetus for starting the YouTube channel, my goal with writing different things and even being on Twitter as such, that's a distinction from just if all I wanted to do, or all I felt called to do, was flourishing in my own individual life, that I'm not sure that I would necessarily engage in those spaces, because for a while I didn't. I was there was quite a period of time where I was totally off everything and I didn't produce anything, and it was probably the best year of my life, just in terms of pure enjoyment and being in joy. But there's a way in which we're also called to be in the world, right, and to contribute in the way that we're all a part of this vast system that is humanity. And so now I for me, there's a distinction between the two. The aspect of my journey that is to push forward as best I can and try to explicate as best I can routes on the mountain, really connecting routes on the mountain that maybe allow other people to see in a way that they hadn't before. And that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is my own personal journey and my own existence in the world. And I want those to intermesh, so I've had a great deal of expansion kind of in my ability to understand and interact based on some of the videos that I've been able to do and conversations I've been able to have with people, which is awesome. So they do interpenetrate, but I try to make sure that I understand them as being still distinct in some way. There's a thing that I'm trying to engage in to move things forward, but that's not necessary. Like the thing can be had, the being, the connectedness to reality, all this flourishing and all that can be had distinct from this pushing forward of the massive human knowledge, the coding that runs on our neural network, as it were. So
cool. That's a good answer. So in the song, right, he talks about a few things. This post-religious faith, a network of communities, ecology of practices, kind of this engineering. Do you think that you have a good understanding of what he means by all that, personally?
Oh man, that's one that, so, oh gosh, where do I start with this? So on one hand, I would start by saying, no, I'm not sure that I truly have a grasp. I've delved into some of that. I've watched some of him and Jordan Hall's videos on a religion that's not a religion. I've found super helpful many of John's videos on his ecology of practices, and have integrated some of them into my own daily routines in terms of some of the Neoplatonic practices and things like that. So I'm sure that's to some level different aspects of what he means, but I'd like to go a slightly different direction here and bring in Augustine, right? Because he talks about Augustine a lot, right? And that he's clearly a pivotal figure for him and someone he tries to emulate. And I think there's this way in which what Christianity is and what the whole idea of what the Christian frame is, in its deepest sense, has been shackled. I think it's been shackled in a lot of ways that are deeply existential, right? That change dramatically what the manifestation of the thing has looked like in a way that is not true to the core fundamentals of what the thing actually is, right? Okay. And I think that you know, and he has a deep respect for religions and the way in which they undergird us, as it were. And so I think that rather than worry about engineering and those kinds of things, we try to open space for and modify language, especially, and pursue language and find the places where there seems to be these dialectics, and really get specific and clear those out and make space so that we don't have these conflicting models that separate us from reality, that are in this space of, say, the religious framework is kind of undergirding a lot of our Western civilization, at least. And so there's a way in which to bring that around. There's a way in which I think the resurrection of Christianity, in terms of what it's actually about, not necessarily, it's a hard term to use because there's so much existential baggage caught up in, there's so many people, we all have hurts from Christianity and ways in which we perceive it's so harmful to human flourishing. So I'm not advocating those, but I'm advocating something that's much deeper, something that's much more fundamental about the narrative structure, which is necessary to the way we work as humans. The narrative structure that provides space and actually necessitates a personal transformation up to the level of the divine, that with a deep sense of openness and radical humility and radical love, that I think is fundamental to the structure of reality itself. So that's kind of a big answer, maybe, but
no, I'm with you on that. Yeah, that kind of evoked for me how he says in that song we heard, the temptation to use political framing, right? And it's like we're drawn to the most disagreeable parts. A lot of times I find myself saying to people who have critiques of the wisdom tradition or whatever it is, that they're hung up on the least important part, to some extent. Why don't we spend more time coming together on the parts that we find most interesting, most agreeable, good, the virtues, and I, my own personal journey, I feel like I'm kind of at the beginning of something, rather than, there's a lot of experiences that I've had that kind of have called me back. Jordan Peterson being one of the big influences, and he has been for a lot of people, so it's validating that it's not a unique experience to me, of having respect for the wisdom tradition. And I'm asking myself the question, and maybe I'll ask you, how necessary do you think it is to kind of start at a place of obedience to some kind of existing institution, and then try that out for a while and have respect for that, and then see where you are? Because that's kind of what my temptation is, to at least immerse myself in it so that I can fully understand it, and then maybe take a step back and see at that point how it's transformed me, how I've changed, and how I regard the narrative or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, for me, where I'm at with this now is I I believe and see a picture that's deeply consonant with a lot of the things that are in, especially Orthodox Christianity. And so I don't think I would feel. I visited a church, an Eastern Rite Catholic church, which is very, very similar, with my brother-in-law recently, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And so there's a way in which I feel that pull, and I want to engage with that. But I'm also, there's this. I think it's a Ram Dass quote that sticks with me a lot. Where he says, "Don't worship the door. Go into the inner temple." And there's this way in which these institutions that emerge around these wisdom traditions and keep them going, right? They're like they're the proliferation and the bearers of the standard into the future, of these aspects of the wisdom traditions that have afforded us grasps on reality that are deeply real. And they move forward, and as such they do deserve a massive amount of respect, and the practices that are engaged in them, oftentimes on the surface they look so ridiculous to us, especially in the modern world, of why are we doing these strange things, and moving our hands in this way and posturing our bodies in this way. But what we've all lost in the modern world is that sense of connectedness, is that sense of embodiment that John's talking about all the time, right? So being actually a part of that, and not doing it just as an observer, but doing it in like real, genuine submission is I think a really deeply, like, I'm not going to argue with that at all.
Right.
The one caution I think that has held me back is just I don't feel that I'm in a space where my ego is, or I'm how to say this. I'm not sure that I'm in a space where there's enough balance that has been found in terms of my relationship to, especially Christianity, where I won't get lost in the attempt to, worship the gate, as it were, or hold the gate, as it were. These senses of apologetics, and I think even in going back and watching that video that I did with Vervaeke, I got. This happened to me in that video. I started doing kind of this like Christian apologetics thing, which runs very easily on my interface, my brain, right? And I started doing it from that space in a way that I didn't really want to, because it's not my goal to defend Christianity in any kind of meaningful way. So that for me is where I land with that. It's like, yes, but also I don't want to get lost in a particular.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have a faint recollection of you and Vervaeke seeming to depart. The shared experiences that you had once you entered the meditation practice seemed to him to put him in a direction where he couldn't return back to Christianity, and then you felt drawn in by your experience. And that was an interesting point, but I'm not sure if I really conceptualize it properly. Could you touch on that difference?
Yeah. Maybe in order to contextualize, for you, how much familiarity do you have with Christianity? Do you have it in your background? And if so, what flavor?
I'm confirmed Catholic, but it was more of just going through the motions, and I almost feel kind of sinful in a way that I knew it was disingenuous at the time for me to even go through confirmation, but it was a practical, I had gone through Sunday school and everything, and it's I'm gonna back out now when I'm being challenged to fully commit to this thing. And I have a lot of reservations about the all or nothing absolutist kind of framing, but I have a really casual understanding of Catholicism.
Nice, awesome, cool, thank you. So I I only know about as much of Vervaeke's background with Christianity as has been shared between him and Pageau and what we talked about in my video. But having come out of the fundamentalist frame initially, I don't know. I had two distinct transition periods in my life. One was I went to an evangelical undergraduate school and got a degree in biblical studies, and it was a minor as part of my curriculum there, and that was deeply helpful for me in starting to open up a lot of the fundamentalist frames. And then I moved into a space where, with my brother-in-law, explored a lot of traditional Catholicism specifically, as that's the space he's in now. But also, I mean, that's led to, I still am exploring that space a lot. I'm reading people like Origen and St. Gregory of Nyssa and St. Maximus the Confessor and Augustine and all that kind of stuff. Dionysius the Areopagite. So for me, by the time I started doing mindfulness, by the time that Vervaeke especially came on the scene for me, my perception of Christianity had been developed a long way beyond what it was from kind of the fundamentalist frame or even just the evangelical frame. And those frames to me are like pretty clearly dependent on a situation of authority of the propositions of this frame, right? Like for most folks who are Protestants, they have this sola scriptura, right? That all you need is through scripture. Like scripture is the word, breathed word of God. And so it places them in this space where scripture has to always be on the pedestal, and they can never really take it down and look through it, right? Like they can't really step away from that frame, because then they lose everything. And thus, like, and whenever you have a frame like that, there's some aspect that you're unwilling to question. And I think once you start to really move to the kind of space that we're talking about in all of this, with deep awareness and meditation and really freedom to become what I would call like a true agentic player on the mountain, it requires the willingness to lay down any frame. And as such, I think most people's perception of Christianity is that it requires that you do not take off a specific frame. And as such, and it does mean that for a lot of people, like for a lot of people who claim the title of Christ and present Christianity, or claim they do, is that is a part of it. That's if not the sole purpose, right? Like
right.
You go to an evangelical church and it's an altar call, right? Like it's make this statement with words and just claim this act of the will, and now it's some kind of, like John says, metaphysical fire insurance. And that's and that's just that like, to me, I would actually, like, this is a I don't know if I want to go that strong. To me, that actually runs antithetical to what the deep structure of Christianity that they're standing way on top of, but they don't know, like they don't understand the connection, but it actually undermines what they're standing on top of, and thus it opens them up to all kinds of issues. And so, for me, when I started engaging in the mindfulness and those kinds of things, I already was able to kind of hold Christianity loosely. And so what I started to do was I would move into a space and let it go. Like, I'm fine. Like, I don't need this to be true. And then what I would find is, because I have I'm really grateful to my parents in the fundamentalist Christian frame for doing this, but my mind is saturated in biblical language. Like, I memorized huge swaths of the Bible growing up. And so what I found was I let Christianity go, and I would go read Vedanta, and I would go read Nietzsche, and I would go read Sartre, whoever, and it was like, I know this story,
right?
So it was always coming back around for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I can't say exactly, but I'm guessing that for Vervaeke, he's not clear that Christianity as such can move into that space. I don't know. That's what I'm hoping to talk about to him about next time we talk.
Yeah.
Is okay. Let's move it beyond that space and see what it can become then. Because from how I see it, it becomes a titanic kind of, you know, arc, if you want to use symbolic terminology, right?
Hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Would you, if there was someone who, like, well, I could talk to myself, but I guess in general, or someone that you, close to you, where you feel comfortable making a recommendation according to your own, kind of preferences, rather than, you know, not feeling confident to assert yourself, but like, what would you recommend as a path? Like, where do you start? Um, for me, I've chosen to just kind of have a liberal reading of the great works of the Western world and start at the beginning and work my way. And I'm like, man, I can't wait until I get to St. Thomas Aquinas. But you know, there's a lot of there's a lot between here and there. Um, yeah, do you have any recommendations? Like, what does a good path look like?
Oh man, gosh, yeah, that's a great question. um, I think it depends so much, right, on who you are and what drives you and what your practical life stage is, because, you know, to keep in mind always being the flourishing of the moment, the flourishing of your life over time. You know, can you look back? Can you start to engage in some practice or some way of moving up the mountain, as it were, and then look back and say, okay, here's the ways in which this is affording flourishing in my life. So,
Mm.
like for some people, I think that's for a lot of people who don't necessarily have time to engage really intellectually, or don't like reading, or those kinds of things. Like, don't go read Plato. Like,
Right.
that's
It,
not going to be helpful
it
for
can
you.
be a slog.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're going to burn out, and then you're just
Right.
going to go back to, kind of being unconscious. And so, I think mindfulness is one that I'm not sure that that's one that doesn't apply to anyone. Like, mindfulness, just starting any kind of mindfulness practice, just start to get used to what it feels like to be aware,
Hmm.
just what it feels like to be aware of anything. Um, I think that's so helpful. Beyond that, like, I do think, it depends on your history and how you look at it and all those kinds of things. But I think the church really is, especially the traditional churches, like they have a lot to offer.
Right.
But again, I know that just because of there's so much cultural baggage, that could be a really tough one for
Yeah.
people. So,
Well, I was kind of trying to absolve you from like those types of considerations. Like, if you were just like recommending a syllabi to someone,
oh,
like, like this person came to you and was like, just, you know, tell me what to do. Like, I want to be on this
yeah.
pathway. Like, according to your own.
It's interesting. I actually do this all the time. So I mean, I do medicine, and I am continually speaking with people about their own inability to manage their own lives, because that's most of American medicine. Is how do I make choices that are good for me in terms of my health? And so I have a few meditation apps that I recommend to almost every patient I see.
Hmm.
I recommend, Insight Timer, Calm, and Headspace. Those are just ones that I'm familiar with.
Right.
And then, depending on the person, there's a few different books I'll recommend. Every now and then, I'll usually just it kind of just feels maybe what would be helpful for them, a specific YouTube channel or something. But
Hmm.
meditation and meditation apps are pretty much always the place
Yeah, it's
I
good,
start.
accessible, a good place to start. Yeah, that makes sense. But on the
Yeah.
intellectual side of things, is there one go-to, I'm kind
Yeah.
of trying to demand this answer out of you. Like, is it reading the Bible? Like, do you start at the beginning of the Bible? Do you read, St. Thomas Aquinas, like I'm kind of productively procrastinating on? Or do you, like, uh, just start going to church, listen to sermons? Like, do you do you start with John Vervaeke, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, or?
I think if you can handle it, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis will gives you a platform of construction that is so many tools that are so powerful. Like I'm going through it again now.
Yeah.
And with a lot expanded framework, and I'm just wow. Like again, there's so much coming out of it to me a second time through, and the first time it blew my mind. So just it gives you a framework that then it's like, then whether it's like, okay, I don't get this aspect of where we were, or why did this happen, or what is going on here in my life. And then it's like, okay, no, now you need to read Aquinas, now you need to read Plato, now you need to read Dionysius. It's like it's so hard to say with some of those things. Like
Sure.
It's hard to go wrong reading Plato, or you can go pretty wrong reading Plato depending on and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
I've got the complete works of Plato right here. It's a tome, right? Like there's a lot of we're talking about plants and insects, and
yeah,
you definitely need like a some guidance on like
totally
an expedient path through it.
Yeah, I mean, Vervaeke's a great choice.
Yeah. Cool.
And it's one of my personal one of the great portals for me. So
I'm satisfied with that. Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not saying like, oh man, why didn't I ask him this or that? There's a lot. It's so dense. I feel like we're almost ready to wrap things up. What are you thinking?
Totally up to you. It's your time, your
My
video.
show?
I have time. I can keep going if you're.
Okay.
But if you have other commitments and all those kinds of things, no problem.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So one thing that I kind of would like to do, practically speaking, is kind of like I almost want to like have a community of people to watch Awakening from the Meaning Crisis together, and kind of like do a big group hangout, and like someone wants to pause here, we break out into discussion and we break it out into videos. I think that would be a cool thing to collaborate on. I'm probably going to do that. I started watching with a friend of mine, and we're discussing it. He's from the Catholic background a little bit more, so he's kind of like our representative for that. I know that Akira, you said you were familiar with Akira the Don, the Meaning Wave community. I've made some friends there. What do you ever think about how this idea of how technology might kind of fracture our society into this like pluralistic, insulated bubbles, how that might influence like this? It's kind of hard not to be pessimistic about how it might prevent like a larger cultural cohesion and shared cultural context. Is that something you worry about?
I think it depends on what level, because I think on a more temporal, shorter time span level, it's certainly a concern. Like I think there you really on the level that John in that song is talking about, the political framing as being the wrong question. I do think when it's used, I think technology, and especially social media, is maybe the most powerful tool we've ever developed as human beings. And I think that generally when we develop new tools, especially ones that are exaptive of our capabilities, in other words, take capabilities that are already present in our being as humans and like transform them in a way that's like exponentially powerful. I think generally when that happens, we have a hard time understanding how powerful it is, and also the destructive capabilities of it. And therefore our initial wave of trying to understand and orient ourselves around with this thing tends to be like deeply destructive. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing actually in the current iteration of the meaning crisis is,
Yeah.
you know, if you live in a space where you're really trying to project your ego onto reality, and you're really trying to force reality into a box, and you're trying to manifest your own self out of this, you know, preconceptualized thing that's totally disconnected from the real world, like, then it allows you to move into this space almost existentially, that is purely, you know, meta. And so, you know, this metaverse thing in it, and I don't know that that's going to be helpful for people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do have so much of this that you're talking about happening, right? You have these communities springing up, and, you know, these Discord servers that have hundreds of thousands of people on them,
Yeah.
like Jonathan Pageau's, the symbolic world. There's so many people on these things, and they care deeply, and they're smart people. They're really smart people, but they're also really genuine, and a lot of them are, you know, real players, in that they're not trying to manipulate anything. They're just trying to, um, really open things up and afford for flourishing. So I think ultimately that wins, because I think that's I think the good always wins, because that's what makes it good.
Right.
So I do think that ultimately, um, these tools become tools that are deeply affording of connection, and in a positive way. But I have no idea how much we have to pay for, you could say, our sins in the development of that.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Let's see. Oh, so I guess I don't want to come into this too and reinvent the wheel too much, because there's a lot of Vervecki that I just need to explore. So I'm not very familiar with the specificities of like the ecology of practices that he articulates, unfortunately. Um, but I kind of have. Oh, so earlier when you were mentioning, oh, like we stand up and we do a certain thing with our arms and all of those things. Contrary enough, I personally see that that's like some of the most compelling part of the wisdom tradition, because I have a reverence for ritual, and I see a lot of utility in those things like confession, and just the utility behind that psychologically and that ritual. And so, um, but I have kind of been contemplating how to create my own rituals in a way. And if you don't mind, I'll share one idea that I
Yeah,
have with you.
absolutely.
So I've kind of, and I only shared this with like maybe one other friend. So it's this idea of entering into around the time of the new year, like, you know, New Year's Eve already exists, and it's kind of a year is a good large unit of time to, it's a natural part of our calendar. We're familiar with it. So it's kind of like a New Year's Eve ritual where I enter into Kairos time. So I'm kind of reconciling and doing like ritualistic practices to like process and uh, move on and let go of this past year. And then it's this idea of like going into a different time framing, and like I'll like burn a candle, right? So I'll basically tell myself like I can take as much time as I want, maybe like a week, and while the candle is burning, kind of like write letters to people, meditate, do some reflection, write down what happened in that past year, lessons, like whatever, um, kind of things, let go of stuff, allow it to be firmly seated in the past, and kind of like burn off that dead wood and stuff like that. And then eventually there is kind of a limit to it, even though it's not like chronological time. It's kind of like setting aside this, uh is profane the right word, this space, like a spiritual space, no, profane, anyway. um
So sacred. So like moving there, you set aside like a space for sacred time in which you're going to try to pull together all these aspects that were you in the last year, and then like solidify them into something that you actually feel clear about,
Yeah.
and then hopefully provide you a kairos into the next level, as it were. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah. And right,
yeah?
and then like a goal setting process or like whatever you want to be part of that. Um, for me, it's kind of like contemplative and writing. I might write letters to people. I might choose someone who I love and regard well and kind of just write them a letter about my the past year of my life and how it shaped me and stuff like that. Um, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. Like, I think that's tremendously meaningful. Like, yeah, no, that's beautiful. I like, man, I could start with so many places there, but I think there's a way in which, you know, all ritual is the attempt to move you into the space of flow, really, of flow from the deepest levels of reality externally to the deepest levels of reality internally. If the ritual's not doing that for you in some way, then it's probably disingenuous the way in which you're engaging with it, I think. And so having a ritual that's working around trying to specifically set aside a space to explore and try to bring into cohesion and integration all these different, you know, threads of being over the course of a specific block of time. And then, okay, now like, can I not put it away, but can I allow that? Can I allow myself, my relevance realization, to let go of that, and to actually give yourself, um, throughout all of the levels of mapping within yourself, to actually recognize and create space for that, and say, hey, here's a it's like saving your game in a video game, right?
Yeah.
like that's what that idea is. And
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. And also choosing to go into the next year. It's a choice, right? It's not just when the ball drops and it's this thing that's kind of like forced on you in chronological time by our society and kind of superficial and like I mean having fun and having a big party is that's important part of the human experience, you know? I'm not, but maybe there's more we can do about being deliberate about kind of earning that and incorporating it into like a spiritual practice sort of a thing. So that's like one little, I feel like I want to kind of feel free to creatively reinvent things that are like mashups of existing traditions and rituals and whatever I come up with that is kind of has utility and and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a valuable thing, because and again, like, I think that will happen and does happen if you're actually engaged in the thing for the reason beyond the thing, right? So if I'm engaged, if I go to church and I go to confession and I, you know, go to the Eucharist because that's what you're supposed to do, and I'm not participating in it. So I'm not willfully, and my awareness is not participating in this participatory act, um, then it doesn't have any meaning, right? But when my awareness is participating in the participatory act, then it has some meaning in terms of integration. And but if that's true, then the way awareness and attention works is they're not purely receptive. Like, when I go and if I go and take place in, or take part in some ancient practice, whether it's, you know, Buddhist or Christian or whatever, and if I'm fully there and fully present to it, and my awareness is engaged, there's going to be some way in which it reveals something to me and works on me. But also, ideally, there's a way in which I work on it, and 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 in so doing, it evolves into something more at the same time. Like the vehicle needs to be moving along with us.
How do you regard psychedelics? I was kind of passively listening to some of your videos, and then doing stuff. Had headphones in, doing work with my hands, and then all of a sudden, like, caught my attention. You were talking about psychedelics, and I kind of missed what was said. So since we were doing this, I figured I would just ask you.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, psychedelics are fascinating. Like the first thing to do whenever you talk about psychedelics is recognize the framework of just the word that you're starting with and what that all means, right? So there's the whole cultural context of like, the 60s, and then the war on drugs, and like, LSD makes people jump out of windows, and like all that kind of stuff, and the bad trip, And so like we if we can just kind of put that over there, right? That's just a thing. That's a historical narrative, and maybe there's merit to some of it, maybe there's not, but that's not what I want to talk about. I think psychedelics have this interesting way in which they're, especially if we're talking about the natural ones like psilocybin or Amanita muscaria, those kinds of things, they're naturally occurring substances that just exist in the material reality in a totally, like, you can use the scientific frame and talk about them totally, just rigorous science, just numbers and structures. But it's undeniable that if they're just eaten in a very straightforward manner, they change what it means. They change everything about how whatever you are interacts with that reality space from which they came. And that's a weird thing. Like, that's, so there's that aspect, and then there's the historical aspect, which is just wild, right? Like, it's as good of a guess as any that the development of consciousness to what it is now is bound up with participation in rituals, and rituals that involved psychedelic substances. So I mean,
right.
There's, I think that they are a tool to connect to the versions of reality that don't appear to us in our normal waking consciousness through our five senses. I think that territory, how that works, the territory in terms of the functionality, the territory in terms of how and when and where it should be engaged and what it looks like, I think that's all kind of murky, because a lot of the wisdom that maybe was available in those areas was kind of stamped out by a lot of thinking that was all focused on this level of consciousness as being the ultimate one.
Right.
So like I'm cautious about saying like, oh yeah, everybody should do mushrooms.
Yeah.
Like I'm not in that camp, but I'm deeply interested in, I do medicine. I'm deeply interested in the research that's being done with them. At some point, I'm certainly open to and hoping to get to participate with that in terms of being a facilitator to help treat, if it continues to go down the route that it seems to be going.
Yeah.
I think, guiding people on these, experiences that seem to like enable flourishing of their lives in really deep and meaningful ways that are non-trivial on every level. I think that's cool. I think that sounds amazing. So
yeah, I'm with you on that. I kind of look forward with optimism for the ways in which the mainstream is accepting the potential therapeutic benefits, and the potential for spiritual awakening, and experiences which put people in touch with something profound, and whatever the interpretation that comes along with that is something for us to all figure out, both collectively and individually.
Yeah, and there's a way in which I think it's Ram Dass who said something like the tool to open the next level of consciousness has to come to this modern era in the form of a material substance. Because we're so materialistic, we're so bound up in this level of reality that it has to be something that's just straightforwardly like this level of reality, right? Like you can take mushrooms and they can watch your brain activity and watch what happens, and it's crazy.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah. Certainly an expedient way to get the frame smashing effect, like for like
yeah, and if that's not what you want and you're not prepared for that, like like if you've got a lot of repressed issues and trauma in your life, and you're engaging in these kinds of experiences to try to have fun, like you will not have fun.
Right. There's definitely a reckless way to regard it, and it's dangerous. You have to have respect it. Definitely a word of caution about considering indulging in these things when you're still in your brain development era, and I know that there are a few windows where you're particularly vulnerable to lapsing into some kind of mental health episode or something like that, and drugs can do harm to induce those types of things. So hopefully we can kind of figure all of that stuff out with science without completely condemning it all. Yeah, I think that it's becoming very compelling to me that certain religious rituals and experiences are kind of echoing in a way the psychedelic experience, and I wouldn't want to unwittingly deprive like ourselves of that in modernity, when it seems like it's been a part of the human experience in these traditions for a long time, and there's mounting evidence to suggest that that's the case.
Yeah, and it's it always has to be balanced, right? Because there is the danger of going too far into that side, too far into the mystical. Because I think a straightforward way to talk about psychedelics is they're substances that engender mystical experience reliably. And there's a danger in that, because you have to maintain connection to material life and your normal waking form of consciousness. And so I think that you're totally right. Like if you're in a state where you're a little bit unstable about how you're connecting to reality already,
right,
yeah, like it's a lot of unexplored territory.
Yeah. Cool. I guess I think we've worked through in one way or another everything that I wanted to touch on, so I appreciate you entertaining how I kind of drove the conversation in certain ways. And I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty content with that. If you have anything else you want to share, feel free. But
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate your willingness to do this and your time and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks so much for reaching out and chatting. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I think, like I said, one of my favorite things about being myself now is when I get to chat with people like you, or we're all just kind of out here. Like you said, we're just trying to explore the space and figure out, hey, what does this look like now? Okay, there's these practices out there. Which ones do I take on? How do I navigate the space? Like in some way, we're all just trying to, hey, like, where are you over there? How's that working out? Like, so yeah. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for chatting. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, and thanks everyone for watching.